Mom, get me my protein shake. Mom, where's my laptop charger? Mom, order me dinner from that Thai place. Mom, pick up my dry cleaning. Mom, cancel my dentist appointment and reschedule it for next week. The commands came one after another, each delivered in the same flat, entitled tone that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I stood in the doorway of my son Marcus's apartment, holding his freshly ironed shirts and listening to him bark orders at me like I was some kind of voice-activated device rather than the woman who had given birth to him 32 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when Marcus snapped his fingers at me while I was folding his laundry. Actually snapped his fingers. Like I was a waitress in some cheap diner instead of his mother. Hey Mom, focus. I need you to call my insurance company and straighten out that billing issue. Then schedule my car for an oil change. And pick up those supplements I ordered. Oh, and stop by the grocery store and get ingredients for that chicken parmesan thing you make. I'm having Brianna over tonight and I want to impress her. I looked at my son, this man I had raised from a colicky infant who wouldn't sleep through the night, and felt something inside me finally snap. Not the soft, sad breaking of a mother's heart that I had experienced so many times over the past few years, but something harder and more decisive. Marcus was sprawled across his leather couch, the one I had helped him pick out and had secretly paid half the cost for, scrolling through his phone without even looking at me. His apartment was immaculate. Not because he cleaned it, but because I came over 3 times a week to maintain it for him. His refrigerator was stocked with his favorite foods, his bills were organized and paid on time, his social calendar was managed down to the minute, all because I had somehow become his unpaid personal assistant. When had this happened? When had my relationship with my only child transformed from mother and son into employer and servant? More importantly, when had I allowed it to happen? I stood there holding his expensive designer shirts, the ones that cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months, and tried to remember the last time Marcus had said please or thank you. The last time he had asked about my day, my health, my feelings about anything. The last time he had treated me like a human being, with needs and desires of my own, rather than a convenient appliance, designed solely to make his life easier. Mom, are you listening to me? Marcus's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp with irritation. I said, I need you to handle the insurance thing today. They close at 5, and I've got back-to-back meetings until 6. This is important. I set the shirts down on his dining table, the expensive glass one that I had helped him move in when he bought this place, and looked at him directly. Really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months. Marcus had grown handsome over the years, with my late husband's strong jawline and my own dark eyes, but there was something in his expression that I didn't recognize. An entitled coldness that made him look like a stranger wearing my son's face. What about your lunch with Brianna today? I asked quietly. Isn't that more important than insurance paperwork? Marcus barely glanced up from his phone. That's different. That's personal. This other stuff is just busy work that you're good at handling. Besides, Brianna doesn't need to know about boring administrative stuff. I want her to see the successful, put-together version of me, not the guy who has to deal with insurance companies and oil changes. The successful, put-together version. As if his success and put-together appearance weren't built entirely on my invisible labor. As if the woman who organized his life, managed his responsibilities, and solved his problems wasn't worthy of being seen by his girlfriend. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same pain I had been carrying for years without fully acknowledging what it meant. I see. I said, though I wasn't sure Marcus was even listening anymore. He had gone back to his phone, already dismissing me in the way that had become his default setting. I was furniture to him, useful furniture that moved and talked and anticipated his needs, but furniture nonetheless. I gathered my purse and coat, movements deliberate and controlled despite the storm building inside me. I'll take care of those things for you, Marcus. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Oh, and remember, get the good parmesan for tonight, not the stuff from the regular grocery store. Brianna knows the difference. Of course she did. And of course it was my responsibility to ensure that Marcus impressed her with ingredients I would buy, food I would prepare, and a clean apartment I would maintain, all while remaining invisible to the woman he was trying to win over. I was 58 years old, and I had somehow become the behind-the-scenes stagehands in my own son's life performance. As I rode the elevator down from Marcus's luxury apartment building, the building I had co-signed the lease for when his credit wasn't quite good enough on its own, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. The woman looking back at me was tired, older than her years, with the slightly hunched posture of someone who had spent decades putting other people's needs before her own. When had I started looking so diminished? When had I begun to fade into the background of my own existence? The truth was, I had been fading for years, so gradually that I hadn't noticed it happening until today. It had started innocently enough, the way these things always do. Marcus had been going through a difficult divorce 3 years ago, overwhelmed with legal paperwork and emotional turmoil, so I had stepped in to help with practical matters. Running errands, organizing documents, making sure he ate regular meals and maintained some semblance of normal life while his world fell apart. It was what any loving mother would do for her child in crisis. But the crisis had ended, the divorce had been finalized, Marcus had moved into his new apartment and started building his new life, and somehow I had never stopped being his crisis manager. The temporary help had become permanent employment, except I had never been officially hired, and I certainly was never paid. The boundaries between motherly support and indentured servitude had blurred so gradually that I hadn't noticed when one became the other. My phone buzzed with a text message as I reached the lobby. Marcus, of course, with an addition to today's to-do list. Also need you to pick up my prescription and drop off that watch for repair. The place closes at 4, so you'll need to prioritize that. Prioritize that. As if I had nothing else in my life that mattered. No other obligations or desires worth considering. As if my entire existence revolved around making his life more convenient. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back something I had never said to my son before. No, just that. Just no. Simple, clean, final. I sent it before I could lose my nerve, then turned off my phone and walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified by what I had just done. For the first time in 3 years, I drove home to my own house instead of running Marcus's errands. Home to the small but comfortable place I had bought for myself after my husband died, the place I had been maintaining with less and less attention because so much of my time was devoted to maintaining Marcus's life. I walked through my front door and really saw my living space for the first time in months. The house was clean but neglected, like a hotel room that was serviced regularly but never truly lived in. The flowers in my garden, visible through the kitchen window, were struggling for attention I hadn't given them. The books on my shelves were gathering dust, because I hadn't had time to read in months. The piano in the corner, my one indulgence when I bought.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
This place was covered with a sheet because I couldn't remember the last time I had played. When had I stopped living my own life? When had my identity become so completely subsumed into being Marcus's support system that I had forgotten who I was as an individual? I sat down at my kitchen table, the one where I had eaten countless solitary meals while Marcus dined out with friends or dates, and forced myself to confront the reality of what my life had become. I was a woman of 58, with no hobbies, no social life, no romantic prospects, and no sense of purpose beyond making sure my adult son never had to experience the minor inconveniences of managing his own existence. I had friends, theoretically, but I hadn't seen them in months because I was always too busy with Marcus's needs to maintain my own relationships. I had interests and talents, locked away and unused, because there was no time for them in a schedule dominated by someone else's priorities. My phone rang, the landline that only Marcus and a few close friends had the number for. I knew without looking that it would be Marcus, probably angry about my unprecedented refusal to follow his instructions. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. On the 4th call, I finally answered. "Mom, what the hell?" Marcus's voice was sharp with frustration and disbelief. "I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Did you not see my text? I need those things handled today." "I saw your text," I said calmly. "I said no." "What do you mean no? You can't just say no." These are important things that need to get done. There it was. The assumption that had been driving our relationship for years. I couldn't say no. I wasn't allowed to have my own priorities, or preferences, or limits. I existed to serve his needs, and the idea that I might have my own agenda was literally incomprehensible to him. They're important to you, I corrected. They're not important to me. And today I'm doing things that are important to me. Like what? The question was loaded with skepticism, as if the idea that I might have important things to do was absurd. Like living my own life. I hung up before he could respond, then unplugged the phone from the wall. For the rest of that afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pleased myself. I made myself a cup of the expensive tea I usually saved for special occasions that never seemed to come. I ran a hot bath with lavender salts and soaked until my fingers wrinkled. I pulled the sheet off my piano and played Chopin until my rusty fingers remembered the joy of making music. I called my friend Helen, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 months, and made plans to have lunch the following week. It was a small rebellion, barely noticeable to anyone but me, but it felt revolutionary. For 6 hours, I existed for myself instead of as an extension of someone else's needs. For 6 hours, I remembered what it felt like to be a person, rather than a service provider. Marcus showed up at my door that evening, letting himself in with the key I had given him for emergencies. He found me in the living room, reading a novel I had been trying to finish for 6 months, a glass of wine at my elbow and classical music playing softly in the background. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his tone serious and slightly condescending, like a parent addressing a misbehaving child. "I don't know what's gotten into you today, but this isn't like you. Brianna's coming over in 2 hours and I need those groceries. The insurance company closes tomorrow at 5, and if I don't get this sorted out, it's gonna mess up my whole week." I marked my place in the book and looked up at him. "And? And what do you mean, and? I need you to handle these things. That's what you do, that's what we've always done. That's what I've always done," I corrected. "You've never handled these things, because you've never had to. I've been handling them for you." Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from his childhood tantrums. "Okay, fine, you handle them and I appreciate it. I really do. But I'm counting on you, Mom. I can't just drop everything to deal with administrative stuff when I have important things going on." "More important than what I have going on?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "What do you have going on? I mean, I know you have your little routines and whatever, but nothing that can't be rescheduled, right? The stuff with Brianna is really important to me. I think she might be the one. My little routines. As if my life was just a series of insignificant habits that existed to fill time between more important people's needs. As if my desire to read a book, or take a bath, or play piano was just a little routine that should naturally give way to his real priorities. "Marcus," I said quietly, "when was the last time you asked me how I was doing?" "What do you mean? I see you all the time. I know how you're doing." "When was the last time you asked about my day, my feelings, my life outside of what I can do for you?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. I could see him searching his memory and coming up empty. "I care about you, Mom, you know that. But right now, I really need your help with these things. We can talk about other stuff later, but tonight is important. Tonight was important. His dinner with Brianna was important. His insurance paperwork was important. His car maintenance was important. His prescription pickup was important. His watch repair was important. Everything in Marcus's life was important enough to commandeer my time and energy, but nothing in my life merited the same consideration. "No," I said again, returning to my book. "Handle your own things, Marcus. I'm busy." "Busy reading?" His voice carried a note of incredulity that might have been funny if it weren't so revealing. The idea that reading could be a legitimate activity worthy of protection was foreign to him. "Busy living my life. Something I should have been doing all along, instead of living yours for you." Marcus stood there for several long minutes, clearly struggling to process this new dynamic. In his worldview, I was a supporting character in his story, not the protagonist of my own. The idea that I might have needs and desires that conflicted with his convenience had simply never occurred to him. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight with frustration. "I'll figure it out myself. But I don't understand why you're being like this. I thought we had a good relationship. We had a convenient relationship, I replied without looking up from my book. Convenient for you. After he left, slamming the door behind him with the dramatic flair he had perfected as a teenager, I sat in the sudden quiet of my house and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the exhausted collapse that followed a day of running Marcus's errands, but the genuine peace that comes from living in alignment with your own values and priorities. It lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Marcus, of course, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Mom, I need you to come over right now. Everything went wrong last night, and I need help fixing it." Despite my resolution of the previous evening, despite my newfound commitment to my own life, despite everything I had realized about our unhealthy dynamic, I found myself asking, what happened? Brianna came over and the whole evening was a disaster. I had to order takeout because I didn't have groceries, and the place messed up the order, so we had cold, terrible food. Then she asked about my watch because she noticed I wasn't wearing the one she had complimented before, and I had to admit it was broken, and I hadn't gotten it fixed. And then this morning, I woke up and realized I never called the insurance company yesterday, so now I have to take time off work to deal with it, which is going to mess up my entire schedule for the rest of the week. I listened to this recitation of minor inconveniences, each one presented as if it were a major catastrophe, and felt a familiar tug of maternal instinct. Marcus was struggling, and my automatic response was to rush in and solve his problems. It was what I had been doing for 32 years, what felt natural and right and necessary, but it wasn't necessary. It had never been necessary. Marcus was a grown man with an MBA and a 6-figure salary and a luxury apartment. He was perfectly capable of calling insurance companies and buying groceries and making restaurant reservations. The only reason he couldn't handle these basic life tasks was because I had been handling them for him, enabling his helplessness and creating a dependency that served neither of us. "I'm sorry your evening didn't go well," I said carefully, "but those sound like things you can figure out how to handle." "Mom, please. I know you're mad at me for some reason, but I really need your help here. I can't afford to take time off work for insurance calls, and I have 3 meetings today that I can't reschedule. If you could just make a few phone calls for me, I promise I'll make it up to you." The promise to make it up to me. How many times had I heard that over the years? And how many times had Marcus followed through on those promises? I tried to remember a single instance when he had done something purely for my benefit, without being asked, without expecting something in return. The exercise was depressingly brief. "Marcus, you're going to have to figure out how to manage your own life. I'm not your personal assistant. You're my mother." The words exploded out of him with genuine anguish. "You're supposed to help me when I need it. That's what mothers do." "Mothers help their children learn to be independent, capable adults," I replied. "What I've been doing isn't helping you. It's enabling you to remain a child. That's not fair. I'm successful, I have a good job, I pay my own bills. I'm not a child. You pay your bills because I organize and remind you to pay them. You maintain your apartment because I clean and stock it. You manage your social calendar because I make your reservations and handle your scheduling conflicts. Take away my labor, and how much of your independent adult life actually exists?" The silence on the other end of the line told me that Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of his dependence, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. "I never asked you to do all that stuff," he said finally, his voice sulky and defensive. "You just started doing it. You never asked me to stop either. You never suggested that maybe you should learn to handle your own responsibilities. You just accepted it as your due. Because you're good at it. You like organizing things and taking care of people. I thought it made you feel useful and needed." There it was, the rationalization that had probably been lurking under our dynamic all along. I did this work because I enjoyed it, because it fulfilled some essential part of my maternal nature, because being useful to him was reward enough for my labor. The idea that I might want appreciation, reciprocity, or recognition as a full person in my own right had never entered the equation. "I do like organizing things," I admitted, "when it's my choice to organize them, when it's my house, my schedule, my priorities. What I don't like is being treated like an appliance that exists solely for your convenience." I don't treat you like an appliance. Marcus, yesterday you snapped your fingers at me to get my attention while giving me orders. If that's not how you treat an appliance, how is it how you treat your mother? Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear him reviewing his behavior, perhaps for the first time seeing it from my perspective instead of his own. I didn't mean... He started, then stopped. It wasn't supposed to be like that. But it was like that. It has been like that for years. And it stops now. So what? You're just cutting me off? You're going to punish me by abandoning me when I need help? The word, abandoning, hit me like a physical blow. It was the deepest fear of any parent, the accusation that could make me question everything I thought I knew about love and duty and family obligation. Marcus knew exactly what button to push to make me doubt myself, to make me wonder if setting boundaries was actually a form of cruelty. But abandonment wasn't what this was about. True. Abandonment would be walking away from Marcus entirely, cutting off all contact, refusing to have a relationship with him at all. What I was doing was refusing to continue enabling his dysfunction while sacrificing my own well-being in the process. There was a difference, even if Marcus couldn't see it yet. I'm not abandoning you, I said firmly. I'm teaching you to stand on your own feet. There's a difference. It doesn't feel different from my end. I know. And I'm sorry for that. But Marcus, if I keep doing everything for you, you'll never learn to do anything for yourself. And I'll never get to live my own life. Neither of us benefits from the current arrangement. I benefit from it, he said quietly. It makes my life easier. Easier? But not better. You're 32 years old. And you can't function without your mother managing your basic responsibilities. How is that better for you in the long run? What if I mess everything up without your help? The question revealed the fear underneath all the entitlement and expectation. Marcus wasn't just lazy or selfish, though he was both of those things. He was also genuinely afraid that he couldn't handle adult life without me. I had been so effective at managing his existence that he had never developed confidence in his own capabilities. By protecting him from every inconvenience and challenge, I had inadvertently convinced him that he was incapable of protecting himself. Then you'll mess up, I said gently. And then you'll figure out how to clean up the mess. And you'll be a little bit stronger and more capable than you were before. That's how people learn, Marcus. Through experience, including the experience of making mistakes. But what if? There's no what if. You're going to handle your own life from now on. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to learn from them, and you're going to become the kind of person who doesn't need his mother to function as his personal assistant. I hung up before he could argue further, then sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through my window. It was going to be a beautiful day, and I was going to spend it doing things I wanted to do instead of things Marcus needed me to do. The thought filled me with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. 3 days passed before Marcus contacted me again. 3 days during which I lived my own life with an intensity and joy that reminded me who I had been before I became his unpaid employee. I played piano for hours, losing myself in Bach and Chopin and Mozart. I had lunch with Helen and remembered how much I enjoyed adult conversation that wasn't centered around someone else's problems. I spent an entire afternoon in my garden, planting flowers and trimming bushes and reconnecting with the simple pleasure of creating beauty with my own hands. On the third evening, Marcus appeared at my door again, but this time he looked different. Less polished, more uncertain. His usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, his shirt was wrinkled, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I let him in, noting that he waited for my invitation instead of just walking in as he usually did. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, settling onto my couch with less than his usual confidence. "About how I treat you. About what our relationship has become. And I think maybe you're right." I waited, giving him space to work through whatever he needed to say. "The past 3 days have been really hard," he continued. "Not just because I had to handle my own stuff, but because I kept reaching for my phone to call you and then remembering that I couldn't. Or shouldn't. And I realized how much I depend on you for things that aren't really your responsibility." "How did you manage?" I asked, genuinely curious. Badly at first. I missed 2 appointments because I forgot to put them in my calendar. I ran out of food because I didn't plan ahead. I had to wear a wrinkled shirt to work because I forgot to pick up my dry cleaning. He ran, his hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. But then I figured out how to set reminders on my phone, and I learned how to grocery shop efficiently, and I discovered that my apartment has an iron in the closet that I never knew existed. Despite everything, I felt a surge of maternal pride. See? You're more capable than you thought. Yeah, but it's harder than when you just handle everything for me. It takes time and attention and energy that I was spending on other things. Welcome to adulthood, I said with a smile. Everyone else manages to handle their own lives while also doing their jobs and maintaining their relationships. You can too. I know, I'm starting to see that. But Mom, I also realized something else. I never thanked you for everything you've been doing. I just expected it, like it was natural and automatic and didn't cost you anything. I never thought about what you were giving up to make my life easier. This was the conversation I had been hoping for, the acknowledgement that had been missing from our relationship for years. What do you think I was giving up? Your own life. Your own time and energy and interests. I was so focused on my own stuff that I never considered that you might have your own priorities. He looked around my living room, really seeing it for perhaps the first time. This is a nice house. When's the last time I asked you about your house, or your garden, or anything that matters to you? I can't remember, I admitted. That's terrible. I've been a terrible son. Not terrible? I said carefully. Thoughtless, maybe. Self-centered. But not terrible. There's a difference. I want to do better, he said, and something in his voice told me he meant it. I want to have a real relationship with you, not just use you as my personal assistant. But I don't know how to change things between us. We start small, I said. You handle your own responsibilities, and I live my own life. We see each other because we want to spend time together, not because you need something from me. We talk about both of our lives, not just yours. What if I mess up? What if I really can't handle everything on my own? Then you'll figure it out, or you'll ask for help in a way that respects both of our autonomy. There's a difference between asking your mother for advice and expecting your mother to solve your problems. Marcus nodded slowly, processing this distinction. Can I still call you sometimes? Not for errands and stuff, but just to talk? I would love that, I said and meant it. I've missed talking to you, Marcus. Really talking. Not just coordinating your schedule. I've missed it too, even though I didn't realize it until now. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us adjusting to this new dynamic. It felt fragile and uncertain, like the first green shoots of spring that might still be damaged by a late frost. But it also felt hopeful in a way our relationship hadn't felt for years. There's something else, Marcus said eventually. Something I found out this week while I was trying to handle my insurance stuff on my own. What's that? The insurance company has been trying to reach me for months about an error in my beneficiary information. Apparently, when I updated my policy after the divorce, they made a mistake in the paperwork. Instead of listing you as my beneficiary like I requested, they somehow listed you as the policyholder. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. What does that mean? It means that legally, according to their records, you own my life insurance policy. You're the one who's been paying the premiums, you're the one who makes the decisions about coverage, you're the one who would receive the payout if something happened to me. Marcus looked confused and slightly concerned. But that's obviously wrong, because you've never paid my insurance premiums. I pay them, right? The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the arm of my chair and tried to keep my expression neutral, while my mind raced through the implications of what Marcus had just told me. Right, Mom. You've never paid my insurance premiums. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and supported and enabled for so many years, and realized that the reckoning I had been avoiding was finally here. The secret I had been keeping, the financial reality I had hidden from him, was about to be exposed in the most unexpected way. Actually, I said quietly, I have been paying your insurance premiums. And your car insurance. And your health insurance. And about 60% of your other bills. Marcus stared at me in shock. What are you talking about? I pay my own bills. I transfer money from my checking account every month. You transfer money from your checking account, which I deposit money into every month, to cover the difference between what you earn and what you spend. That's impossible. I make good money. I don't need anyone to supplement my income. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I had hoped never to have to share with Marcus. Inside were 3 years' worth of bank statements, canceled checks, and financial records that told the story of how I had been secretly subsidizing his lifestyle without his knowledge. Your rent is $3,000 a month, I said, spreading the documents on the coffee table between us. Your salary after taxes is $4,800 a month. Your car payment is $500, your insurance is another $400, your utilities average $200, your cell phone is $150, your gym membership is $120, your streaming services are $60, your credit card minimums are about $300. That's already $5,700 in fixed expenses, leaving you negative $900 before you buy food, gas, clothes, or entertainment. Marcus picked up the bank statements with trembling hands, scanning the numbers that laid out his financial reality in stark black and white. But I always have money in my account. I never overdraft. I never worry about paying for things. Because every month I transfer $1,500 into your checking account to cover the shortfall. I've been doing it for 3 years, ever since you moved into this apartment and started living beyond your means. Where do you get $1,500 a month to just give away? You worked as a secretary for 40 years. You can't possibly have that kind of money. I took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived, the revelation that would change everything between us, just as I had always known it would. But unlike the story I had heard about the wedding and the DNA test, and the dramatic television reveal, my secret was going to come out quietly, in my living room, over insurance paperwork and bank statements. Marcus, I said gently, there's something I need to tell you about your grandmother. 25 years ago, when Marcus was 7 years old and I was struggling to make ends meet as a single mother, my own mother passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. I had always known she was frugal, saving every penny and living well below her means. But I had no idea of the true extent of her financial discipline until her lawyer contacted me about her estate. My mother, it turned out, had been quietly accumulating wealth for decades. She had invested small amounts consistently in blue-chip stocks, had owned several pieces of real estate that she rented out but never mentioned to family, and had been collecting dividend payments that she immediately reinvested rather than spent. When she died, her estate was valued at just over $4 million. $4 million? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Grandma Rose was a millionaire? She was. And she left everything to me, with specific instructions that it was to be used to ensure that you had every opportunity to succeed in life, but that you were never to know about the inheritance until you were mature enough to handle the responsibility wisely. Marcus set down the bank statements and stared at me with a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been betrayal. You've been rich for 25 years and you never told me? I've been financially comfortable for 25 years. There's a difference. Your grandmother's money has been invested conservatively, generating enough income to supplement our lives without touching the principal. But I never considered it my money exactly. I considered it a trust fund for your future. But you could have lived better. We could have lived better. You worked that secretary job for another 15 years after Grandma died. Why didn't you just retire and enjoy the money? I walked to the window and looked out at my garden, choosing my words carefully. Because your grandmother left me a letter along with the will. She had watched her own children struggle with inherited wealth, and she had strong opinions about how money should and shouldn't be used. She wanted you to develop your own work ethic and values before you knew about the inheritance. She wanted you to become the kind of person who could handle wealth responsibly. What did the letter say? I went back to my desk and pulled out the yellowed envelope I had kept sealed for decades, the one I had read only once before storing away for the day when this conversation would finally happen. She wrote, "Margaret, this money is not for making life easier. It is for making life better. Do not let Marcus know about it until he has proven himself capable of working hard, treating others with respect, and taking responsibility for his own choices. Money given too early turns people into entitled children. Money given at the right time can help good people do great things. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of his grandmother's wisdom. So you've been watching me all these years, waiting for me to prove myself worthy? I've been loving you all these years and hoping you would grow into the kind of person your grandmother believed you could become. The kind of person who deserved to inherit her legacy. And have I proven myself worthy? I looked at my son, this man who had spent the past 3 years treating me like a personal appliance, who had snapped his fingers at me and given me orders and dismissed my needs as irrelevant, and felt my heart break a little more. Honestly, no, you haven't proven yourself worthy yet, but I'm hoping that's about to change. The words hung between us like a bridge that could either connect us or collapse entirely, depending on how Marcus chose to cross it. I watched emotions flicker across his face. Hurt, anger, shame, and something that might have been the first stirring of genuine self-reflection. So all this time, when I've been struggling to pay my bills, when I've been stressed about money, when I've been working extra hours to try to get ahead, you could have just written me a check and solved everything? I could have, but then what would you have learned? What kind of person would you have become if you never had to struggle, never had to work for anything, never had to develop resilience or problem-solving skills? I would have been happier, he said bitterly. I would have been less stressed. I would have had time for the things I actually cared about instead of constantly worrying about making ends meet. Would you? Or would you have been like so many trust fund children I've known, directionless, entitled, unable to find meaning or purpose because everything came too easily? Marcus stood up and began pacing around my living room, his movements sharp and agitated. That's not your decision to make. That money was left to me, through you. You had no right to withhold it based on some arbitrary judgment about my character. It wasn't arbitrary. Your grandmother was very specific about the conditions she wanted met before you inherited. And technically, the money was left to me, with instructions about how to use it for your benefit. There's a difference. What conditions? What exactly did she want me to prove? I retrieved the letter again and read directly from my mother's precise handwriting. She wanted you to demonstrate the ability to work hard without expecting immediate rewards, to treat service workers and subordinates with respect, and kindness, to take responsibility for your mistakes without blaming others, and to show genuine concern for the well-being of people who couldn't do anything for you in return. Each criterion hit Marcus like a physical blow. I could see him mentally reviewing his behavior over the past few years, measuring himself against his grandmother's expectations and finding himself wanting. The service workers thing, he said slowly. She meant like how I treat waiters and cashiers and mothers who clean your apartment and organize your life and run your errands without pay or appreciation. Oh, God. Marcus sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I've been failing her test for years, haven't I? You've been failing to become the person she hoped you would be. But that doesn't mean you can't still become that person. It just means you have work to do. What if it's too late? What if I've proven that I'm exactly the kind of entitled person she was worried about? I sat down beside him, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to crowd him while he processed this revelation. Your grandmother believed that people could change, that anyone could choose to become better than they were. That's why she structured the inheritance the way she did, not as a punishment, but as motivation for growth. How much money are we talking about? Marcus asked quietly. How much have I potentially lost through my behavior? The original $4 million has grown to approximately $12 million over the past 25 years. But Marcus, you haven't lost it. It's still there, still waiting for you. The question is whether you're going to become the kind of person who deserves it. $12 million. I watched Marcus absorb this number, saw the exact moment when the magnitude of what was at stake truly hit him. His entire lifestyle, his apartment, his car, his ability to date women like Brianna and impress colleagues with expensive dinners. All of it had been an illusion supported by my secret subsidies. Without my monthly transfers, he couldn't afford the life he had been living. But with his grandmother's inheritance, he could afford almost anything he wanted. There's something else you need to understand, I continued. The monthly money I've been giving you, that's not coming from your inheritance. That's coming from my own retirement savings, money I earned and saved from my secretary's salary over 40 years of work. Marcus's head snapped up. What? I've been spending my own money to subsidize your lifestyle. The inheritance has been sitting untouched in investment accounts, growing and waiting. But the $1,500 a month I've been transferring to you? That's been coming out of my own nest egg. But why? Why would you spend your own retirement money on me when you had access to Grandma's inheritance? Because the inheritance wasn't mine to spend. It was yours to earn. And because I thought if I could just support you through the difficult early years of your career, you would eventually become financially stable on your own, and I could stop the subsidies without you ever knowing they had existed. How much of your own money have you spent on me? I walked back to my desk and pulled out another folder, this one containing my own financial records. The numbers were less impressive than his grandmother's estate, but no less significant in terms of what they represented. In the 3 years since your divorce, I've transferred $54,000 from my retirement account to your checking account. I've also paid directly for your insurance policies, which has cost another $18,000, so $72,000 total. Marcus stared at the paperwork documenting my sacrifices, his face pale with shock and shame. $72,000. Mom, that's probably more than half of your retirement savings. It's actually about 60% of what I had managed to save. But I thought it was worth it if it helped you get established and become independent. Independent? God, that's ironic. I'm the opposite of independent. I'm completely dependent on you, and I didn't even know it. Now you know. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents that laid out the financial reality of our relationship with brutal clarity. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and uncertain, more like the little boy he had once been than the entitled man he had become. I don't know how to be different. I don't know how to be the person Grandma wanted me to be. This is who I am. Someone who takes advantage of people without even realizing it. Someone who expects other people to solve my problems. Someone who treats his own mother like hired help. That's who you've been. It's not necessarily who you have to remain. But how do I change? How do I become worthy of $12 million when I can't even manage my own life without my mother's secret support? You start by taking responsibility for your own life. All of it. The apartment you can't afford, the lifestyle you've been living beyond your means, the debt you've accumulated, the relationships you've damaged. You start by facing the reality of who you are and what you've done, and then you choose to be better. What if I can't? What if I try and I fail? Then you fail, and then you try again. That's how growth works, Marcus. It's not a straight line from where you are to where you want to be. It's a messy, difficult process of making mistakes and learning from them, and gradually becoming the person you're capable of being. Marcus stood up again, but this time his movements were less agitated and more purposeful. I need to move out of my apartment. I can't afford it, and I shouldn't be living somewhere that requires your financial support to maintain. That's a start. And I need to pay you back. The $72,000. I don't know how long it will take, but I need to repay what you've spent on me. That's not necessary, Marcus. I chose to spend that money. It is necessary. For me, it's necessary. I can't move forward knowing that you sacrificed your retirement security for my convenience. I need to make that right. I felt a flicker of hope, the first I had experienced in years when it came to my relationship with Marcus. This was the kind of thinking his grandmother had hoped to inspire. Not just remorse for past mistakes, but commitment to making amends and doing better. There's one more thing you need to know, I said, about your inheritance. Your grandmother didn't just leave money. She left instructions for how it should be used. What kind of instructions? I pulled out the final document from my mother's estate papers. The one I had been dreading to share because it would force Marcus to confront not just his own failures but his potential for redemption. She wanted half of the money to be used for your personal financial security, paying off debts, buying a home, ensuring your children's education, that sort of thing. But the other half was supposed to be used for charitable purposes. She wanted you to identify causes you cared about and donate $6 million to making the world better. $6 million? In charity? She wanted me to give away half of my inheritance? She wanted you to understand that wealth comes with responsibility, that having more than you need means helping people who have less than they need. She believed that learning to give generously would teach you the true value of money. Marcus sat back down heavily, overwhelmed by the scope of his grandmother's expectations. I don't even know what causes I care about. I've been so focused on my own life, my own problems, my own wants, that I've never thought about making the world better. That's something you'll need to figure out. But Marcus, you don't have to figure it all out today. You just have to start. You have to take the first step toward becoming the person your grandmother believed you could be. What's the first step? The first step is acknowledging that the life you've been living is unsustainable and unfair to the people who have been supporting it. The second step is making concrete changes to fix that. The third step is proving, through your actions over time, that you're capable of the kind of character your grandmother wanted to see. How long do I have? Is there a deadline for proving myself worthy? I shook my head. There's no artificial deadline. Your grandmother trusted that I would know when you were ready. But Marcus, I'm 58 years old. I won't be around forever to manage this inheritance and make these decisions. At some point, you're going to have to prove yourself worthy, not just to meet your grandmother's expectations, but because it's the right thing to do. The weight of that reality settled over both of us. For years, our relationship had been stuck in a pattern where I enabled Marcus's dependence while he remained oblivious to the cost of his lifestyle. Now, suddenly, everything was transparent. The financial support, the inheritance, the conditions for receiving it, the expectations for how it should be used, all of it was out in the open, forcing us both to confront the dynamics that had been shaping our relationship without either of us fully acknowledging them. I need time to think about all this, Marcus said eventually. I need to figure out how to restructure my entire life. Take the time you need. But Marcus, while you're thinking, I need you to understand something. The monthly subsidies stop now. Today. I can't continue spending my retirement money to support a lifestyle you can't afford. I understand. How long do I have before the money runs out in my checking account? Based on your current spending patterns, probably about 3 weeks. 3 weeks to figure out how to live within my actual means. 3 weeks to start becoming the person you're capable of being. After Marcus left that evening, I sat in my quiet house and marveled at how different everything felt. For the first time in years, I had told my son the complete truth about our relationship, about the money, about my expectations, and his grandmother's legacy. The secret I had been carrying for 25 years was finally shared, and while I didn't know what would happen next, I knew that we could never go back to the old dynamic of me enabling his dependence while he remained oblivious to the cost. The next few weeks would be crucial. Would Marcus rise to the challenge of supporting himself and beginning the character development his grandmother had envisioned? Or would he be overwhelmed by the transition and retreat into resentment and blame? I had given him all the information he needed to make good choices, but I couldn't make those choices for him. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus was going to have to figure out how to live as a truly independent person. 3 days later, Marcus called me early in the morning, his voice tight with stress but also determination. "Mom, I found a studio apartment in a less expensive part of town. The rent is $1,500 a month, which is exactly what I can afford on my actual salary. I can move in next week." "That's wonderful, Marcus. How does it feel?" "Terrifying. The apartment is tiny compared to what I'm used to, and the neighborhood isn't as trendy. But it's clean and safe, and it's mine in a way that my current place never was, because I can actually pay for it. I'm proud of you for taking that step." "Don't be proud yet. I haven't actually done anything except sign a lease. But I wanted you to know that I'm serious about this. About changing, about becoming someone worthy of Grandma's inheritance." Over the following weeks, I watched Marcus navigate the practical challenges of downsizing his life to match his actual income. He sold his expensive furniture and replaced it with second-hand pieces. He canceled subscriptions and memberships he couldn't afford. He learned to grocery shop with a budget and cook simple meals instead of ordering takeout every night. More importantly, I began to see changes in how he interacted with other people. When he called to update me on his progress, he asked about my day and my feelings instead of just talking about his own challenges. When we met for coffee, he insisted on paying the check even though it meant choosing the less expensive cafe. When he told me about his interactions with his landlord, his coworkers, and service providers, I could hear a new awareness of how his words and actions affected other people. The changes weren't dramatic or overnight. Marcus still had moments of frustration and entitlement, still struggled with the transition from his artificially comfortable lifestyle to one that reflected his actual earning power. But gradually, consistently, he was becoming someone different. Someone more thoughtful, more responsible, more aware of the impact he had on others. 2 months after our revelation conversation, Marcus showed up at my door with a small wrapped package and an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child. Nervous excitement mixed with pride. "I have something for you," he said, holding out the gift. "It's not much, but I wanted to give you something that I bought with money I actually earned." Inside the package was a simple but elegant bookmark, silver-plated with my initials engraved on one side. It was the kind of thoughtful, personal gift that showed someone had been paying attention to your interests and preferences. "I remembered that you're always reading," Marcus explained. "And I thought about how I used to interrupt you all the time when you were trying to enjoy your books. This is my apology for all those times, and my promise that I'll respect your time and interests from now on." The bookmark itself was lovely, but what made it precious was what it represented. The first gift Marcus had given me in years that came from genuine thoughtfulness rather than obligation or guilt. He had chosen something specifically for me, something that acknowledged my individual interests and needs. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than he could possibly know. "This is beautiful. There's something else. I've been thinking about what Grandma wanted me to do with the charitable portion of the inheritance. I don't know enough yet to make big decisions about donating millions of dollars, but I want to start learning. I've been volunteering at a homeless shelter downtown, just a few hours a week, helping serve meals and listening to people's stories." This was progress beyond what I had dared to hope for. Marcus was actively seeking out opportunities to help others, to understand problems beyond his own immediate concerns, to develop the kind of empathy and social awareness his grandmother had valued. "What have you learned?" "That I don't know anything about real hardship. That the problems I thought were so serious, like not being able to afford expensive restaurants or having to live in a smaller apartment, are nothing compared to what some people face every day. That I've been incredibly lucky and privileged, and I never appreciated it because I was too focused on what I wanted but didn't have." That's exactly the kind of understanding your grandmother hoped you would develop. I'm starting to see why she structured the inheritance the way she did. If she had just given me $12 million when I was 25, or even 30, I would have wasted it. I would have bought expensive toys and lived an even more selfish life than I was already living. I wouldn't have learned anything about the value of work or the importance of helping others. She was a wise woman. She understood that money without character is destructive. But money combined with good character can change the world. I'm not there yet. I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility. But I'm starting to understand what it would mean to be ready. 6 months after our conversation about the inheritance, Marcus had transformed his life so completely that he seemed like a different person. He had not only adjusted to living within his means, but had begun to thrive in ways that surprised both of us. His smaller apartment had forced him to be more intentional about his possessions, keeping only what he truly valued. His tighter budget had taught him to find satisfaction in simple pleasures, cooking a good meal, reading a book from the library, taking walks in the park instead of expensive entertainment. Most significantly, his volunteer work at the homeless shelter had evolved into a deeper commitment to understanding and addressing systemic social problems. He had started taking evening classes in nonprofit management and social work, using his free time to develop expertise that would help him make intelligent decisions about charitable giving when the time came. "I met someone," he told me during one of our weekly coffee dates, which had become a cherished tradition for both of us. "Her name is Sarah, and she's the volunteer coordinator at the shelter. Tell me about her. She's amazing. She has a master's degree in social work and could probably make 3 times as much money in the private sector. But she chooses to work with homeless families because she believes everyone deserves a chance at stability and dignity." She's passionate and smart and completely dedicated to making a difference. She sounds wonderful. What does she think of your volunteer work? She says I'm a natural at connecting with people, especially the men who are struggling with pride issues around accepting help. She thinks it's because I understand what it feels like to have your self-image challenged and to have to rebuild your sense of worth from the ground up. I smiled, hearing in Marcus's description of Sarah the kind of woman his grandmother would have approved of, someone who valued character over status, service over self-interest, substance over appearance. Are you going to tell her about the inheritance? Eventually, maybe. But not yet. I want her to know me for who I am now, not for what I might inherit someday. And honestly, I want to know that she likes me for myself too. I've learned that money complicates everything, and I want to build something real before we have to navigate those complications. This was wisdom that the old Marcus never would have possessed. The understanding that relationships based on financial attraction were ultimately hollow, that genuine connection required seeing and valuing each other as complete human beings rather than as sources of security or status. I think your grandmother would approve of your approach. I hope so. I think about her a lot these days, wondering what she would think of the changes I've made, whether she would consider me ready for the responsibility she wanted me to have. What do you think? Do you feel ready? Marcus considered the question seriously, not rushing to claim readiness he hadn't earned, but also not dismissing the possibility entirely. I feel like I'm becoming ready, like I'm developing the tools and understanding I would need to handle that kind of wealth responsibly. But I also feel like there's still more I need to learn, more ways I need to grow before I can be trusted with $12 million. Such as? I need to understand more about effective charitable giving, how to research organizations, how to measure impact, how to avoid well-meaning donations that actually cause harm. I need to continue developing relationships with people from different backgrounds so I'm not making decisions from a bubble of privilege. And I need to prove to myself that the changes I've made are permanent, not just temporary responses to crisis. This level of self-awareness and humility was exactly what his grandmother had hoped to cultivate. Marcus was no longer the entitled young man who had treated me like a personal assistant and expected the world to accommodate his convenience. He was becoming someone who understood that privilege came with responsibility, that wealth was a tool for making the world better, rather than just making his own life easier. 1 year after our revelation conversation, Marcus achieved something that would have seemed impossible during his days of depending on my monthly subsidies. He had not only learned to live within his actual income, but had managed to save enough money to make his first payment toward repaying the $72,000 I had spent supporting his lifestyle. "It's only $500, he said, handing me the check with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "At this rate, it will take me 12 years to pay you back completely. But I wanted to start even if it's just a small amount. Marcus, you don't need to repay this money, I chose to spend it. I know you chose to spend it, but I also know that you spent your retirement savings to subsidize my irresponsibility, and that's not okay. I need to make this right, not because you're demanding it, but because it's the right thing to do." The check itself was meaningful, but what it represented was even more significant. Marcus had developed an internal moral compass that guided his decisions, even when no one was watching or demanding accountability. He was choosing to do the difficult, expensive thing because it aligned with his values, not because he was being forced or manipulated into it. "There's something else," he continued. "Sarah and I have been talking about getting married. I want to ask her, but I also want to be completely honest with her about my situation before I do. About the inheritance, about my past irresponsibility, about everything. I don't want to start a marriage with secrets." "That's very mature of you. I'm scared she'll think differently about me when she knows about the money. Not because she's a gold digger, she's the opposite of that, but because it might change how she sees our relationship, our future together. Right now, we're two people who work hard and live modestly and share similar values. If she knows I'm potentially inheriting millions, it might feel like we're from different worlds. Or it might not. You won't know until you have the conversation. I know. And I want to have it. I want to build our relationship on complete honesty. But I also want your opinion about something. Do you think I'm ready? Do you think I've become the person Grandma wanted me to be? This was the question I had been dreading and anticipating for months. The decision about whether Marcus had earned his inheritance was ultimately mine to make, and it would affect not just his future, but the futures of everyone he would help with his grandmother's charitable expectations. I think you've made incredible progress, I said carefully. You've learned to live responsibly, to treat people with respect, to consider the impact of your actions on others. You've developed empathy and social awareness and a commitment to helping people who are less fortunate. But I think you need more time. Not because you're not good enough, but because the responsibility your grandmother envisioned is enormous. $6 million in charitable giving isn't something to approach lightly. It requires wisdom and experience and networks of relationships that take time to develop. Marcus nodded, not disappointed, but thoughtful. How much more time? I don't know. But I think you'll know when you're ready. And when you do know, really know, then we'll have another conversation about your inheritance. What if something happens to you before I'm ready? What if I never get the chance to prove myself worthy? It was a question that had been weighing on my mind as well. I was 59 years old and in good health, but life was unpredictable. The inheritance couldn't remain in limbo forever, waiting for Marcus to achieve some impossible standard of perfection. I've been working with your grandmother's lawyer to establish clear criteria for the inheritance transfer. If something happens to me, there are objective measures in place to determine your readiness. Things like financial stability, demonstrated charitable involvement, character references from people you've helped. You won't be at the mercy of subjective judgment. That makes me feel better, not about something happening to you, but about knowing there's a fair process in place. Marcus, I want you to understand something. Your worthiness isn't about being perfect. It's about being the kind of person who can handle wealth without losing your humanity, who can use privilege to lift others up rather than just to make your own life more comfortable. You're much closer to that person than you realize. 2 weeks later, Marcus called me with news that made my heart sing with pride and hope. I asked Sarah to marry me, he said, his voice bubbling with excitement and relief. And she said yes, but more importantly, I told her everything. About the inheritance, about how I used to treat you, about the money you spent supporting me, about Grandma's expectations, everything. How did she react? She was quiet for a long time, processing all of it. Then she said she was proud of me for changing, grateful that I had been honest with her, and excited about the possibility of working together to make good decisions about charitable giving when the time comes. She said the money doesn't change how she feels about me, but it does make her feel more responsible for helping me continue growing into someone worthy of that trust. She sounds like exactly the right person for you. She is. And Mom, she had an idea. She thinks we should start small with charitable giving now, even before I inherit Grandma's money. She wants us to donate a percentage of our combined income to causes we care about, so we can learn about effective giving and develop good habits before we're dealing with millions of dollars. This was precisely the kind of thinking that demonstrated Marcus's readiness for greater responsibility. He was no longer waiting for permission or perfect circumstances to begin living according to his values. He was taking initiative, seeking out opportunities to practice the kind of character his grandmother had hoped to see. I think that's an excellent idea. We're going to start with 5% of our income, split between the homeless shelter where we met and an education nonprofit that helps low-income kids get college scholarships. It's not a lot of money in absolute terms, but it feels significant to us. And Sarah says that learning to give proportionally when you don't have much is the best preparation for giving wisely when you have more. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, Marcus. And so am I. As I hung up the phone that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace about my relationship with my son. He had become the man I had always hoped he could be, not through my enabling or controlling, but through his own hard work and commitment to growth. He had faced the truth about his character, accepted responsibility for his mistakes, and chosen to become better. The inheritance would come eventually, when Marcus was truly ready for that level of responsibility. But in many ways, he had already inherited the most important gift his grandmother had wanted to give him: the understanding that wealth without character was worthless. But character without wealth could still change the world. Looking back on those difficult years when Marcus had treated me like his personal assistant, when I had enabled his dependence while sacrificing my own well-being, I could see how necessary that crisis had been. Without hitting bottom, without facing the consequences of his entitlement, Marcus never would have been motivated to change. Without my refusal to continue the old pattern, he never would have learned to stand on his own. The inheritance had always been secondary to the real gift his grandmother had wanted to give him, the gift of becoming someone worthy of being trusted with wealth and responsibility. That gift was finally beginning to be unwrapped, slowly and carefully, through the daily choices Marcus was making to live with integrity and purpose. And for the first time in years, I was living my own life fully, not as an extension of someone else's needs, but as a complete person with my own interests, relationships, and dreams. The woman who had been ordered around like Alexa had found her voice, her boundaries, and her power. Both Marcus and I had been transformed by the crisis that had forced us to confront the truth about our relationship. We still had work to do, both individually and together, but we were finally doing it as two adults who respected each other, rather than as enabler and dependent. The future felt full of possibility in a way it hadn't for years, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them with honesty, integrity, and genuine love, rather than obligation and resentment. 3 years had passed since that transformative conversation in my living room, and the man who walked through my front door that autumn evening bore little resemblance to the entitled son who had once snapped his fingers at me for attention. Marcus moved with quiet confidence now, carrying himself like someone who had earned his place in the world, rather than someone who expected it to be given to him. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, settling into the chair across from me with the kind of serious expression that might have worried me in the past. But his eyes held warmth and respect that made me curious rather than concerned. "What's on your mind?" "Sarah and I have been married for 18 months now, and we've been following through on our commitment to charitable giving. We've donated consistently to organizations we've researched carefully, we've volunteered hundreds of hours at different nonprofits, and we've educated ourselves about effective philanthropy. But more than that, we've been living our values every day in how we treat people, how we make decisions, how we think about our responsibilities to our community." I nodded, having watched this transformation with growing pride and amazement. Marcus and Sarah had indeed become the kind of people who naturally considered the welfare of others in their daily choices. They had built a marriage based on shared values and mutual respect, created a modest but comfortable life within their means, and developed genuine expertise in areas that would serve them well as philanthropists. "I think I'm ready," Marcus continued, "not just ready to inherit Grandma's money, but ready to honor her vision for how it should be used. Sarah and I have identified the causes we want to support long-term, we've built relationships with nonprofit leaders whose work we respect, and we've developed the financial literacy to manage wealth responsibly." "Tell me about the causes you've chosen." "Education access for low-income students, because we believe everyone deserves the opportunity to develop their potential, regardless of their family's financial situation. Housing stability for vulnerable families, because we've learned through our volunteer work that stable housing is the foundation for everything else. Employment, education, health, community connection, and mental health services for people who can't afford private treatment, because we've seen how untreated trauma and mental illness perpetuate cycles of poverty and homelessness." Each choice reflected deep understanding rather than surface-level compassion. Marcus and Sarah had moved beyond feeling sorry for people to actually comprehending the systemic issues that created and maintained social problems. They had developed the kind of sophisticated analysis that was necessary for effective philanthropy at the scale his grandmother had envisioned. "Those are excellent choices. What's your plan for implementation?" "We don't want to just write checks and walk away. We want to partner with organizations that are already doing excellent work, provide funding that helps them expand successful programs, and stay involved as advocates and volunteers. Sarah's background in social work gives us credibility with nonprofit leaders, and my business experience helps us understand organizational development and sustainability." This approach demonstrated exactly the kind of wisdom his grandmother had hoped to cultivate. Marcus understood that meaningful philanthropy required more than money. It required time, relationship, expertise, and long-term commitment. He had learned to see himself as a steward of resources rather than simply a benefactor. "There's something else," Marcus said, his expression growing even more serious. "We want to establish a foundation that will outlive us, that will continue this work for generations. We want to use part of the inheritance to create an endowment that will provide sustainable funding for these causes indefinitely." That's very forward-thinking. It's what Grandma would have wanted. She didn't save money for decades just so I could have a more comfortable lifestyle. She saved it to make a lasting difference in the world. Sarah and I want to honor that vision by creating something that will keep growing and giving long after we're gone. I felt tears gathering in my eyes as I listened to Marcus articulate a vision that surpassed even what his grandmother had originally imagined. He had not only developed the character she had hoped to see, but had expanded her dreams into something even more ambitious and meaningful. "I think you are ready," I said quietly. "More than ready. You've become exactly the person your grandmother hoped you would become, and you've found a partner who shares and strengthens your commitment to making the world better. So you'll transfer the inheritance? I'll call the lawyers tomorrow to begin the process. But Marcus, before we make this official, I want you to understand what you're taking on. $12 million is a tremendous responsibility. It will change your life in ways you can't anticipate, create pressures and opportunities you've never experienced. Are you prepared for that?" As prepared as anyone can be for something they've never done before, but I know that money without purpose is empty, and money with the wrong purpose is dangerous. Sarah and I have spent years developing a clear sense of purpose, and the skills to pursue it effectively. We're not perfect, but we're ready to learn from our mistakes and keep growing. Then let's make it official. The legal transfer took several weeks to complete, involving lawyers, financial advisors, and extensive documentation. But the emotional transfer happened in that moment when I recognized that Marcus had genuinely earned the right to inherit his grandmother's legacy. He had transformed himself from someone who took advantage of others' generosity into someone who understood the responsibility that came with privilege. When the inheritance was finally legally his, Marcus surprised me by asking for one more conversation before he and Sarah began their philanthropic work in earnest. "I want you to be involved," he said. "Not as someone who manages things for me, but as a partner. You understood Grandma's vision better than anyone. You've watched me grow into someone worthy of this responsibility, and you have wisdom about people and relationships that Sarah and I can learn from. What kind of involvement are you thinking about? We want you on the foundation board. We want your input on major decisions. We want to benefit from your experience and judgment as we figure out how to do this well." This invitation felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with his grandmother's original letter. She had trusted me to guide Marcus toward readiness for this responsibility, and now Marcus was trusting me to help him fulfill it wisely. But this time I would be participating as an equal partner rather than as someone carrying the burden alone. I would be honored to serve on the board. There's one more thing. Sarah and I have been talking about your retirement, about the money you spent supporting me during those years when I was living beyond my means. We want to set up an account that replaces what you sacrificed, plus enough additional funds to ensure you can retire comfortably whenever you choose. Marcus, that's not necessary. It is necessary, not because you're demanding it, but because it's the right thing to do. You spent your retirement savings to support my irresponsibility, and now that I have the resources to fix that, I want to. Please let me do this. The offer was generous beyond what I had ever expected, but more than the money itself, it represented Marcus's understanding of reciprocity, of the importance of taking care of people who had taken care of him. It was evidence that he truly grasped the difference between charity and justice. All right, thank you. 6 months later, I attended the inaugural board meeting of the Morrison Family Foundation, named in honor of Marcus's grandmother and the values she had instilled in our family. Marcus and Sarah presented their first year's funding plan, allocating grants to carefully researched organizations with proven track records of effectiveness. But what moved me most was watching Marcus interact with the nonprofit leaders who had come to present their proposals. He listened with genuine interest to their expertise, asked thoughtful questions about their work, and treated them as partners rather than supplicants. The entitled young man who had once ordered me around like a voice-activated device had become someone who understood that wisdom came from many sources, that wealth was a tool for amplifying others' good work, rather than for commanding their attention. As the meeting concluded and we prepared to leave, Marcus approached me with the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from work well done. "How do you think Grandma would feel about today?" "I think she would be amazed and proud beyond words. You've not only met her expectations, you've exceeded them. I couldn't have done any of this without everything you taught me, Mom. The values, the work ethic, the understanding that real success means making other people's lives better. Even during those years when I was treating you badly, you were modeling the kind of person I needed to become. You did the hard work of becoming that person. I just refused to enable you when you were choosing to be someone else. That refusal saved my life. If you had kept subsidizing my selfishness, I never would have learned to be better. Thank you for loving me enough to let me struggle." We walked out of that conference room together, mother and son, equals now in a way we had never been before. The inheritance had been transferred, the foundation established, the work begun. But the real transformation had happened years earlier, in a series of difficult conversations that forced us both to confront who we were and who we wanted to become. Marcus had learned that true wealth wasn't about having enough money to avoid life's inconveniences, but about having enough character to use whatever resources you possessed in service of something larger than yourself. And I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the refusal to rescue them from the consequences of their choices, the space to grow into their best possible self. The son who had once made me feel like his personal Alexa had become someone I was proud to call my partner in making the world a little bit better. And that transformation had been worth every difficult moment of the journey that brought us here. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.